Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has asked children under 16 to view the country's social media ban as a protective guardrail rather than as a punishment. Well, in a video directly addressed to adolescents, Albanese said that the law was meant for their well-being and to protect them from the pressures of online life. Now, he appealed for affected children to not shy away from seeking support and guidance.
From December 10, if you're under 16, you're no longer allowed to have a social media account.
Australia has embarked on the world's first sweeping initiative to restrict social media for young people. The social media ban for under 16s has come into effect from today, and acknowledging that the transition would not be easy, he appealed to adolescents to not hesitate to ask for help during the transition period.
If you have questions, by all means, reach out. Talk to your parents, your teachers and your friends. And if you feel like you need more support, Headspace and Kids Helpline is there to assist.
Albanese also urged those affected to make the most of their time during the upcoming summer vacations.
Above all, make the most of the school holidays coming up, rather than spending it scrolling on your phone. Start a new sport, learn a new instrument, or read that book that has been sitting there on your shelf for some time. And importantly, spend quality time with your friends and your family, face to face.
10 social media companies have been ordered to implement access restrictions or face fines of up to $33 million. The ban, which is described as first of its kind globally, follows years of concern over cyberbullying, mental health impact, screen addiction and algorithmic exposure. Child safety groups and parents have praised the move as a necessary step, while tech giants and digital rights organizations warn that it could limit free speech and push children to unregulated spaces. And to discuss the matter in greater detail, joining us on the broadcast is Katie Silver. Katie is a reporter from Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
Katie, should Australia's new under-16 social media restrictions be seen primarily as a necessary child safety measure, or would you see this as a blunt instrument that duly curtails young people's freedom of expression and access to information?
That is one of the central debates as part of all of this. So critics, for example, as you say, see it as a way of curtailing freedom of speech. We have seen this High Court challenge to young people supported by a digital freedom advocacy group have actually taken this law to court, to the High Court. It's going to be held next year. They say that basically what this does is it equates young people, it takes away their democracy, their freedom of expression, their freedom of speech, and their freedom to communicate. And they say that why are they able to work, able to do other civic duties, but not have this this element? So that is a part of the discussion. Other critics, for example, say that they point to the way that this is going to impact people like LGBTQ plus people, for example, you know, that have been able to use these platforms to seek out alternative viewpoints, to find brethren, to find a sense of community. There was also, for example, a number of disabled people who said that their world is now going to become smaller. You know, they might be, for example, homebound, wheelchair bound, and they used social media as a way of stepping out of that space to be able to connect with other young people in similar positions from around the world, and that they will have those limits. So that's some of the negatives, and that's some of the central criticism. Right. On the other hand, you hear the debate when it comes...
Of course, and having said that, there is also, as you've just mentioned, the risk of displacement and inequality, and teens might shift to encrypted apps, gaming platforms, or even VPNs that would be much more harder to moderate and possibly exposing them to even greater risk. Now, do you think the ban can disproportionately affect disadvantaged youth, as you were just discussing, who rely on online communities for education, support, or even connection, for that matter?
I mean, that is a potential part of it. And we heard, for example, from one influencer who was based in the countryside saying that this was her way of sort of trying to, she wants to be famous, she wants to be an actress, and this was her way of making videos, getting a profile and building that. The other element, though, I guess, to that is that potentially disadvantaged youth are going to be spending more time on their phones, maybe have less, for example, supervision. And so in that sense, it actually may benefit them not having those phones. The other element too is potentially if they're disadvantaged enough, they may not have phones in order to access social media, which also leads to social ostracism. So there are, I guess, both elements in that sense. You mentioned VPNs, and we have already seen a surge, for example, in a number of other alternative apps. For example, today, the four most downloaded apps on Australia's App Store are all alternative social media platforms that aren't in that top 10 list. For example, there's one called Lemonade that is actually being created by one of the founders of TikTok, and there's another one that's being billed as a safer alternative to TikTok, CoverStar it's called. So it does seem like people are looking for ways of avoiding it. You also mentioned VPNs, and there is that issue of potentially people finding alternative ways to it. So far, we're also hearing, though, that actually it seems that many people, their phones are still working. They are still accessing the platform. We've heard from the government on that. They say that there's a chance that this is going to be a slow and sloppy rollout, but at least the conversation has begun.
Right, but now should the focus be on making the digital space itself safer with tighter oversight of the content and the algorithms that young people are exposed to, and rather than keeping children away from it altogether? And even if shielding them works in the short term, how long can that realistically remain a solution in a world that's always connected per se?
Yes, I think in a perfect world, social media would be a safer place to be. This law, and the reason it is so landmark and groundbreaking, is it's putting the onus to make social media a safe place back into the hands of big tech. And so far, they haven't had a financial incentive to do so. Now, one interesting example on this is YouTube Kids, which is, a platform that is supposed to just be kid-friendly content, but there's no disambiguation whether the content was made by AI, whether it is actually safe for kids or not. And that's because there's no financial incentive. And so what the Australian government thinks they're doing by this law is it's saying, look, make a social media that is safe for young children, make it so that there is no grooming, so that there is no addiction, so that they won't delve deep into these online dark worlds. And then perhaps it is a safe place for young children to be. I think at the moment they're saying there just hasn't been this incentive on big tech companies to do that.
Of course, Katie, we'll have to see and wait for the implementation to finally be in effect to see how it ratifies. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your valuable perspective with us.